They say the forest has its own kind of grief. Quiet, patient, and endless. That night, in the foothills of North Carolina, the rain came not as a storm, but as a slow, deliberate cleansing, as if the earth itself needed to begin again. Beneath the silver veil of rain, a faint cry carried through the dark. It wasn't quite human, yet it wasn't purely wild either. It was the sound of something small, frightened, and alone. At the Willow Creek Wildlife Refuge, caretaker Clara Bennett was finishing her rounds. The kind of quiet, habitual work that fills the empty hours of a life that's lost too much. She had been at the refuge for 12 years, tending to orphaned animals across the Appalachian corridor. But this night felt different. She stopped when she heard it. One cry, sharp and desperate, then another, softer, fragile, fading almost into the rhythm of the rain. Clara followed the sound through the flooded path, her flashlight trembling as the beam swept over slick stones and wet leaves. She found the first creature near the base of a fallen pine, a tiny bobcat kitten, shivering under the roots, her fur clumped and soaked. The kitten hissed weakly, too young to understand that help had arrived. And just beyond, barely visible in the half-light, lay a fawn, smaller than a house cat, legs twisted awkwardly, its breath coming fast and uneven. Clara knelt in the mud between them. Two orphans from different worlds, predator and prey, both born into a night too cruel to survive alone. She didn't think, she just acted. She gathered them both into her coat, one on each arm, feeling their fragile heartbeats flutter against her chest. The drive back to the refuge was slow and tense. Lightning flashed across the narrow roads. At each curve, Clara caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes red, tired, but strangely alive. It had been 2 years since she'd lost her daughter. 2 years since she'd last felt the weight of a heartbeat against her body. And now, in the space of a single storm, she carried two. Inside the small infirmary cabin, the lights hummed quietly. She set the fawn on a pile of blankets and placed the kitten near a heat lamp. For hours she worked in silence, towel drying, feeding with syringes, whispering small prayers under her breath. She named the bobcat Luna, for the pale moonlight that glinted off her wet whiskers, and the fawn, Willow, for the trembling grace of her legs and the tree that had sheltered her. It was nearly dawn when both began to stir. Luna sneezed first, a tiny sound that made Clara laugh for the first time in months. Willow followed with a faint bleat, her ears twitching at the strange company. Clara leaned back against the counter, exhausted. 2 small lives breathing because she'd chosen to listen. She opened her weathered journal and wrote just 1 line. Found them together. Maybe that means something. Days passed in quiet repetition. Luna drank from a bottle, her small claws gripping Clara's sleeve. Willow learned to stand again, wobbling on unsteady legs like a child learning her first steps. The world outside went on. Cars passing on wet asphalt, news playing faintly from the radio. But inside the refuge, time seemed to move more slowly. There was no rush, only rhythm, feeding, warming, resting. Clara kept them in separate enclosures, as protocol demanded. Yet, she noticed something unusual. Whenever Willow cried, Luna would press against the wooden divider, pacing, restless. And when Luna mewed from hunger, the fawn would lift her head, ears alert, as if answering a call she didn't yet understand. It was instinct defied, a pattern that shouldn't exist, and yet it was there. Clara began to wonder. Was it possible that loneliness itself could become a bridge between species? She remembered a study she once read, how isolation in young mammals can suppress their natural curiosity, even alter their brain chemistry. But when raised in an environment of gentle interaction, their stress levels drop, and something new, something like empathy, begins to form. She had seen it before, in other animals, but never like this. The mornings at Willow Creek became softer, Clara's hands grew steadier. She started humming again while she worked. The same lullaby she used to sing years ago, back when the world felt safe. Sometimes she'd catch herself watching them too long. Luna, with her tufted ears and quiet defiance. Willow, with her wide eyes and fragile trust. Two beings born into opposite roles of survival, now sleeping within a few feet of each other, their breathing sinking as if guided by some hidden rhythm. In her notes, Clara wrote, "Perhaps kindness isn't learned. Perhaps it's remembered, buried deep beneath instinct, waiting for the right moment to surface." That thought stayed with her, because deep down, she understood what it meant to survive something that tries to change who you are. Then, one evening, as the last streaks of orange faded from the horizon, the rain came again. Not as violent as before, just a soft drizzle that made the air smell of pine and earth. Clara stood by the enclosure, notebook in hand, watching Willow struggle to stand on her own. Luna watched too, tail flicking with restless focus. The moment Willow steadied, the kitten pressed her nose against the wire fence. A gesture so small it could have gone unnoticed. But to Clara, it felt like witnessing the first note of a song that hadn't been heard before. Willow took a step forward, hesitant. Luna didn't move. She waited. Then, with a fragile trust only the young possess, the fawn touched her nose to the kitten's paw through the gap. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The rain, the wind, even Clara's breath, all held in suspension. Two creatures who, by every law of nature, should have been divided by fear, instead found comfort in contact. That night, Clara wrote more than she had in months. "If survival is the rule of the wild," she began, "then compassion must be its quiet rebellion." She didn't know what the coming weeks would bring. She didn't know if Luna's instincts would change as she grew, or if Willow's fear would return. But for now, for this night, they were both alive and unafraid. And somehow, that felt like enough. Before turning off the light, Clara whispered to the two sleeping fawns. Different size, different species. Maybe none of that matters at all. Sometimes, the beginnings that change us don't arrive with grand gestures. They arrive quietly, in the middle of a storm, when we decide to stop running from pain long enough to hold something fragile in our hands. Clara didn't save the world that night. She just saved two small lives, and in doing so, began to heal her own. If you've ever found hope in an unlikely place, you already know how this story feels. Stay with us, because what happens next at Willow Creek will challenge everything we think we know about the wild and about love itself. Morning arrived quietly at Willow Creek. The storm had washed the refuge clean. Every leaf glistened with leftover rain. Every scent in the air felt new. Inside the recovery barn, the hum of heat lamps mixed with the low creak of wooden floors. Clara Bennett moved carefully between two small enclosures, one holding Luna, the rescued bobcat kitten, the other, a fragile white-tailed fawn named Willow. For 3 days, she'd kept them apart. The protocols were clear. Predators and prey should never share contact, especially during early rehabilitation. Still, there was something about the way they reacted to each other, something that didn't fit the usual pattern of fear. Every time Willow stirred, Luna would lift her head from the blanket, her tufted ears twitching toward the sound. And when Luna mewed softly, Willow's ears would turn, searching, curious, not frightened. It wasn't just instinct, it was recognition. On the fourth morning, sunlight spilled through the high barn windows in pale golden stripes. Clara opened the outer doors to let in the warmth. The two orphans were stronger now, eyes clearer, steps steadier. She set their bottles down and watched them eat in the hush of dawn. Luna finished first, licking the rim of the container, her small paws pressing against the wood. Willow, still unsteady, lowered her head to drink slowly, her breath fogging the cool air. Then it happened. A single moment, that would stay with Clara for the rest of her life. Willow lifted her head and looked toward the sound of a low purr. Luna was sitting upright now, amber eyes fixed on the fawn. For a long, fragile second, the two just looked at each other through the slats of the wooden divider, not as hunter and hunted, but as something else entirely. Clara held her breath. She expected Willow to bolt, to retreat behind the straw. Instead, the fawn tilted her head slightly, ears forward, calm. Luna inched closer, one paw, then another. When their eyes met, the tension that defined their species, that invisible boundary of fear and survival, seemed to fade. It would have been easy to call it a coincidence, a passing curiosity between two young creatures still learning the world. But as the minutes stretched, Clara saw something unmistakable. Awareness. Luna's tail flicked in slow, measured rhythm. Willow's breathing steadied. A calm fell between them that made the barn feel almost sacred. Clara whispered to herself, "They're talking." Not in words, but in silence. In the kind of understanding that doesn't ask permission to exist. She picked up her journal and wrote a single line. Curiosity can be kinder than fear. That afternoon, she decided to test a theory. She placed the two feeding pens side by side, with only a low mesh wall dividing them, enough to protect, but not enough to hide. When feeding time came, Luna ate quickly, as always, while Willow hesitated. The scent of milk mingled with the faint musk of fur and hay. Luna turned toward the fawn and gave a small, almost questioning chirp, the kind bobcats make when they're not sure whether to trust or play. Willow took one step forward. Clara waited, her hand resting on the latch, ready to separate them if instinct took over. But it didn't. Instead, Willow sniffed through the mesh, her tiny nose touching the kitten's whiskers. Luna blinked, surprised, and then leaned closer, pressing her forehead gently against the barrier. It lasted only a second, maybe two, but to Clara, it felt like time had stopped. That evening, the caretakers gathered in the main office. One of them, a younger volunteer named Evan, had watched the interaction through the window. "You think they'll actually bond?" he asked. Clara hesitated before answering. "I think," she said softly, "they already have." There was laughter, disbelief more than humor. A bobcat and a fawn. Nature didn't work that way. But as she drove home that night, Clara couldn't shake the image from her mind. The two small silhouettes beneath the morning light, divided by wire, yet united by something wordless and pure. She wondered what her late daughter would have thought. Her child had always loved stories where the impossible became real, where the world softened long enough for kindness to sneak through. Maybe this was one of those stories. In the days that followed, Clara noticed small changes. When she cleaned the pens, Luna would pace until Willow returned. When Willow lay down, Luna often mirrored her position, curling in the same direction. Their behaviors were syncing, a phenomenon rarely documented between predator and prey species. Clara remembered reading that early exposure to non-threatening interactions can influence behavioral development in mammals, shaping emotional resilience and even reducing aggression later in life. But she didn't need a study to tell her what her eyes already knew. The two had found something their kind had forgotten. Trust without demand. Companionship without reason. And maybe, Clara thought, that's what made it sacred. One afternoon, she left the divider open for a few minutes while she replaced a heating lamp. When she turned back, Luna had wandered into Willow's space. The fawn froze, one delicate hoof raised mid-step. Clara's heart caught. She was only a few feet away. But in that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath again. Luna sniffed the air. She approached slowly, head low, ears angled forward in the posture of curiosity, not aggression. Then, with the soft mule, she rubbed her head against the form's neck, the same way she would have greeted her mother. Willow didn't move. She closed her eyes, leaned slightly, and exhaled. It was trust in its purest form, a quiet surrender to something deeper than instinct. Clara didn't stop them. She simply stood there, one hand on the post, tears blurring her vision, because in that small, fragile gesture, she saw not just two young animals finding comfort, but the possibility that even the laws of survival can bend when love chooses to intervene. That night, as she wrote her report, she paused before the last line. Under behavioral notes, she added something not meant for the scientific record. They remind me that healing doesn't always come from those like us. Sometimes it comes from what we're taught to fear. She closed the notebook and sat by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the fields. The rain from the past week had given way to mist, the kind that clings to the trees like memory. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of Willow's small bleat echoing through the barn, followed by Luna's soft reply. Different voices, same longing. When two beings meet without fear, something ancient in the world stirs. The reminder that compassion isn't owned by any one species. It's older than instinct, deeper than survival. It's what binds every living thing that's ever known loneliness. In that barn, under the slow rhythm of dawn and dusk, Luna and Willow weren't rewriting nature. They were returning it to what it had been before fear entered the world. But as every caretaker knows, the more an animal grows, the more its nature grows with it. And love, as gentle as it is, must learn to live beside instinct. Because soon, Luna would outgrow the safety of those small walls. And what came next would test everything they had built together. If this moment between Luna and Willow stirred something in you, that small ache of wonder, that quiet belief that love still finds its way, stay with us. The next chapter will take you deeper into their extraordinary bond, and the question that every heart eventually faces. Can love endure when the wild calls it away? Time moves differently in places that hold healing. At Willow Creek, days didn't rush. They unfolded like ripples on a still pond. Weeks had passed since the night Clara Bennett had found the two orphans, the bobcat kitten Luna and the white-tailed fawn Willow. Now the rhythm of their days had softened into something steady, something gentle. A dance between two hearts that should have been divided by nature, yet somehow found each other instead. It began with play. There's a kind of joy that only the young know, the kind that doesn't question what's possible. Every morning after feeding, Clara would open the small paddock outside the barn, letting the fawn stretch her legs and the kitten chase shadows. What began as clumsy steps soon turned into games. Luna crouching low, tail flicking in mock ambush, while Willow darted and leapt with startled grace. From a distance, it almost looked like choreography. Predator and prey moving in rhythm, not to survive, but to belong. Clara called it their dance between instincts. She'd sit on the fence post, camera resting on her knee, notebook open beside her. Sometimes she recorded data, feeding intervals, body weight, behavioral cues. But most of the time, she simply watched. Luna would pounce too soon and tumble, paws flailing, while Willow circled back, her small hooves drumming the dirt in playful defiance. And when Luna grew tired, she'd flop into the grass, eyes half closed, purring softly as Willow lowered herself nearby. Close enough for comfort, but never too close to break the delicate thread of trust between them. One afternoon, Clara noted something that stopped her mid-sentence. When Willow approached, Luna's tail stopped, twitching. A natural hunting reflex she was learning somehow to suppress. That kind of self-control wasn't taught, it was felt. The first truly warm day of spring came like a blessing. The snowmelt had fed the small creek running behind the pasture, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Clara led them there for the first time, curious how they'd react. Willow splashed in first, legs trembling at the shock of the cold. Luna hesitated. Water wasn't a bobcat's favorite element, but as the fawn leapt through the shallows, droplets catching light like glass, something changed. Luna crouched, eyes wide, then launched forward with a half-hearted pounce, landing in the water with an undignified splash. She blinked, shook herself off, then did it again. Less out of instinct, more out of joy. Clara laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. It echoed across the creek, mingling with the splashes, the laughter-like bleats of the fawn, and the soft, chuffing sounds from Luna. For the first time in years, she felt the world not as something to be managed or mourned, but as something alive, generous, forgiving. Sometimes, nature teaches without words. Watching them, Clara began to see her own grief differently. She'd built walls of routine and caution around herself, the way fences protect but also confine. But Luna and Willow didn't carry fear like that. They met each day without expectation, without resentment. They didn't compare or question. They simply lived, side by side, learning each other's rhythms. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in that. One that doesn't erase pain, but lets it breathe until it becomes something gentler, something like peace. Weeks later, Clara noticed their play changing. Luna's movements were quicker now, more deliberate. Her muscles rippled beneath her fur as she stalked invisible prey in the tall grass. Willow would startle at sudden movements, then relax when Luna's pounce ended in harmless, clumsy rolls. The dance was shifting, the wild slowly returning to the wild-born. Clara felt a knot of pride and worry in equal measure. She knew what this meant. Nature never stays still. Instinct always calls back. And yet, even as Luna's hunting skills awakened, she never turned them toward her friend. Instead, she seemed to redirect them, chasing leaves, branches, anything but the fawn. One evening, Clara wrote, "Maybe compassion is not the absence of instinct. Maybe it's learning to live with it and choose gentleness anyway." Behaviorists often talk about something called cross-species play, rare but documented in controlled habitats. It's when young animals, despite belonging to opposing survival roles, form bonds through repeated safe interactions. The chemistry behind it mirrors what happens in maternal bonding. Oxytocin release, lowered cortisol levels, synchronization of heart rates. But as Clara watched them that spring, she felt something science couldn't measure: the soulfulness of their connection. These weren't just biological responses. They were choices, made over and over again in small, ordinary moments. Every shared nap, every cautious nose touch, every playful chase that ended not in fear but laughter. They were writing their own quiet definition of love. One weekend, the refuge opened its observation trail to a small group of visitors. Retired teachers, local families, children with cameras dangling from their necks. When they saw Luna and Willow together, the silence that followed was different. Not disbelief, but reverence. A woman whispered, "I didn't know something like that was possible." Clara smiled faintly. "Neither did they," she said. Later, a man in the group, older, kind-eyed, approached her. "My wife passed last year," he said quietly. "I didn't think I could feel peace again, but watching them, I don't know. It gives me hope." Clara nodded. "They did the same for me." That night, Clara sat by the barn window, watching the two friends rest beneath the hanging lantern. Their shadows stretched long across the hay, overlapping in gentle patterns. She thought about the strange balance of it all: predator and prey, fear and tenderness, loss and renewal. Somehow, in the quiet space between them, the world had made room for both. The heart, she realized, is capable of holding contradictions. It can ache and heal at the same time. It can protect and still reach out. It can carry instinct and still choose kindness. Maybe that's what this dance between instincts truly was. Not a miracle, not a violation of nature, but its most honest expression. Because the wild isn't cruel. It's just honest. And sometimes, honesty looks a lot like love. But time was moving forward. Luna's paws were growing larger, her leaps are more powerful. And though Willow still followed her everywhere, the keepers began to worry. Love, no matter how deep, must eventually meet the truth of what we are. And soon, Clara would face the hardest decision a caretaker can make, the choice between keeping them safe or letting them grow. If Luna and Willow's friendship has already touched something tender in you, stay with this story, because what comes next will test their bond and remind us all what it really means to love something wild and let it go. Sometimes, love meets its first test, not in anger, but in instinct. And instinct, once awakened, asks to be heard. It happened on a morning that began just like any other. Golden light across the pasture, dew shining on the grass. But peace has a way of hiding the tremor before the quake. The bobcat Luna had grown leaner, stronger. Her paws landed softer now, her leaps more precise. She no longer stumbled when she played. The fawn, Willow, had grown too. Her legs longer, her coat marked with fading spots that spoke of time moving forward. Their friendship still held, tender and bright. Yet, as Clara watched them through the wooden gate, she sensed a shift, something small, almost invisible. The way Luna's gaze lingered a little too long on the fluttering wings of birds, or how her muscles tensed when a rabbit darted through the brush. It wasn't aggression. It was nature returning home. That morning, Clara carried their feed buckets down to the pen. The air smelled of wet grass and cedar. Luna came bounding first, tail high, eyes sharp. Willow followed close behind, cautious but trusting. Clara smiled, until she saw the tiny shape near Luna's feet. A robin, motionless in the dirt. Luna pawed at it gently, then pressed down. The instinct was pure, ancient, unthinking. Willow froze. Her small frame stiffened, breath shallow. The air between them went still. Predator and prey, drawn back into the roles the world had written for them long before they met. Clara stepped forward, heart hammering. "Easy, sweetheart," she whispered, voice trembling. Luna looked up, eyes wide, almost confused, as if unsure what she'd done wrong. Her paw lifted, releasing the small bird. The robin didn't move. For a long moment, no one did. Then Willow backed away, small hooves pressing into the mud. She made a low, broken sound. Not quite fear, not quite sorrow, just recognition. Clara felt it too. The fragile piece they'd built had cracked, even if only slightly. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the journal open, pen poised but unmoving. She wrote, "Love can quiet instinct, but it can't erase it. Maybe it was never meant to." She thought about her daughter, about the years since the accident, how even after loss, her mother's instincts never stopped. She still listened for footsteps that would never come, still checked the porch light every night. Maybe Luna's moment hadn't been a betrayal. Maybe it was memory, the body remembering what the heart had forgotten. A few nights later, Clara stayed late at the refuge. The wind carried the smell of rain again, the same kind that had brought both orphans into her care months earlier. Luna paced the edge of the enclosure, restless. Willow stood near the oak tree, ears twitching nervously. The air between them felt charged, like a storm about to break. When thunder rolled across the hills, Willow startled, bolting toward the barn. Luna chased, not to hunt, but to follow, confused by the sudden movement. It happened in seconds. A flash of hooves, a hiss, a startled bleat. By the time Clara reached them, Luna had Willow pinned, but there was no bite, no blood, only the trembling silence of instinct colliding with love. Luna stepped back first, Her chest heaved. She looked at Willow, not with hunger, but with shame. Willow's body shook, yet she didn't run. She stayed, eyes wide, staring at the kitten she had once trusted completely. Clara knelt between them, tears blurring her sight. "Easy now," she whispered, voice cracking. "We're all just trying to remember who we are." For days afterward, the air in the refuge felt heavy. Willow kept her distance, her body angled away when Luna drew near. Luna, too, seemed quieter, eating less, watching more. The dance they once shared had slowed to careful steps, each afraid of breaking the fragile thread between them. Clara couldn't help but see herself in that tension, the push and pull between nurture and nature, holding on and letting go. She began to wonder, was it right to keep them together any longer? Or had their love reached the edge of what safety could hold? Sometimes, caring for something wild means accepting that peace is temporary. In the natural world, balance is not a promise, it's a conversation. Every predator's hunger keeps another life in motion. Every act of restraint ripples outward, shaping the quiet equilibrium of the land. And yet, in rare moments, like the one between Luna and Willow, nature pauses. It listens. It lets compassion interrupt the rhythm of survival, even if only for a season. Perhaps that's all love is, a pause between instincts. On the third day after the incident, Clara entered the pen again. She carried 2 small dishes, one of meat, one of greens, and set them apart as usual. Luna sat before her plate, silent, eyes lowered. Willow stayed back, hesitant. Clara sighed, heart aching. She turned to leave, but heard something behind her, the soft scrape of claws against stone. A movement. Luna had picked up her meat in her jaws, carried it across the pen and dropped it gently beside Willow. Not a gift, exactly, but a gesture. An apology, a peace offering. Maybe just a reminder that their bond, though strained, wasn't gone. Willow looked at the meat, then at Luna. Her ears twitched, and she took a small step closer. The two stood there for a long time, side by side in the drizzle. The predator sharing what she once would have claimed. The prey, accepting what she could have feared. Clara didn't move. She just let the scene unfold, knowing she was witnessing something sacred again. This time, not in innocence, but in forgiveness. Healing isn't about pretending pain never happened. It's about learning how to live gently beside it. That morning, Clara realized something she hadn't before. Luna and Willow's friendship wasn't perfect because it defied nature. It was beautiful because it carried nature within it and still chose mercy anyway. Just as the heart learns to keep beating after loss, just as love continues, even when it knows it might be hurt again. But love, even love this deep, can't stop time. As spring gave way to summer, Luna's strength grew faster than Willow's trust could keep up. And soon, the refugee board began to ask questions Clara didn't want to answer. Safety, separation, next steps. The word goodbye hung quietly in the air, waiting for someone brave enough to say it aloud. If this part of Luna and Willow's story touched something familiar in you, that tension between holding on and letting go, stay with us, because what comes next will bring one of the hardest choices of all, and a moment so tender, it still lingers in every corner of Willow Creek. There comes a point in every story, the moment when love stops being a feeling and becomes a choice. And sometimes, that choice means risking the very thing you fought to protect. The question wasn't whether they loved each other, it was whether love could still be safe. By midsummer, the hills around Willow Creek turned golden. The grass stretched high and soft, and the air carried the hum of life. Crickets, bees, wind through pine. Inside the refuge, though, there was a quiet tension. The kind that doesn't shout, but lingers, like a question no one wants to answer. Luna, the bobcat, was now nearly a year old. Her muscles had filled out. Her coat gleamed with strength. She had grown into what nature intended her to be. Willow the fawn, though graceful and steady, still trembled at sudden sounds. Her instincts had sharpened too, but not in the same way. Clara saw it clearly now, the imbalance. One born of time, one of biology. And though her heart wanted to hold on to what they built, the laws of nature were beginning to whisper otherwise. The refuge board met on a humid Thursday morning. Papers stacked, fans humming, voices low. The director, a man Clara respected deeply, cleared his throat. "Clara," he began gently, "we need to make a plan for Luna." Those words fell like stones. He spoke with reason about safety, maturity, rehabilitation, about how every wild creature must one day return to its kind. How keeping her too long could distort what she was meant to become. He wasn't wrong, but his words hurt in the way truth often does. Not because they're cruel, but because they're right. Still, Clara tried to fight. "She's not like other cats," she said softly. "She's learned compassion, restraint. Maybe that means something." The director sighed. "It does. It means you've done your job well. But we can't keep her dependent forever. The wild isn't cruel, Clara. It's just honest." Those words stayed with her all day. The wild isn't cruel. It's just honest. A week later, Clara was asked to prepare Luna for transition, to start the process of introducing her to a protected mountain enclosure where other rescued bobcats lived semi-wild. The idea of separation made her chest tighten. Still, she followed protocol. She began reducing Luna's human contact, encouraging her independence, feeding through a gate instead of by hand, speaking less, watching more. Luna noticed the distance. Her eyes followed Clara longer each day, searching for cues that never came. She started pacing again, restless. And Willow, the one who didn't understand rules or timelines, waited by the fence every morning, calling softly into the silence that Luna once filled. Clara couldn't bear it. She broke protocol one evening. After the refuge closed, she walked to the pen, unlatched the gate, and let Luna out to roam the open pasture one last time. The bobcat ran first, fast and free, as if her body had been waiting for this release. Then she stopped halfway down the hill, turned, and waited for Willow. The fawn approached, slowly, cautiously. But when Luna crouched low, that familiar playful bow, Willow understood. They began again. The dance. The same pattern they had known since the beginning. Predator and prey forgetting what the world expected of them. Clara watched, hand over her mouth, tears catching the last light of dusk. For a few brief minutes, everything felt whole again, the kind of peace that doesn't ask questions. And then, just as quietly, it ended. Luna stopped. She looked back toward the trees, the same trees that led to the mountain enclosure. Her body leaned forward, ears twitching. The call of the wild, soft but certain. Clara whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. You can go." But Luna didn't move. She turned instead toward Willow, brushed against her one last time, before walking back to Clara, rubbing her head against the caretaker's leg. In that gesture, Clara felt something break and mend all at once. It was love, stripped of possession, full of grace. Love, Clara realized, is not measured by how long we can hold on, but by how gently we can let go. It's the same lesson life had already tried to teach her. Through loss, through grief, through the quiet emptiness her daughter left behind. For months, she'd thought rescuing Luna and Willow was about saving them, but maybe, all along, they'd been saving her, reminding her that caring deeply will always carry risk. That's what makes it real. The next morning, Clara met again with the refugee team. This time she didn't argue. "We'll do it right," she said, slowly, gently. They deserve that. They scheduled Luna's transfer to begin the following week. Short visits to the mountain habitat, supervised by staff, while Willow remained at the refuge for her final rehabilitation. It wasn't a clean answer. It was a human one. Complicated, imperfect, but kind. Clara spent the next few days preparing the transition space. She lined the travel crate with soft cloth, left one of Luna's blankets inside for scent. Each small gesture felt like writing a goodbye letter she couldn't bring herself to sign. On the last evening, she sat by Luna's pen one final time. The sky was turning the color of old photographs, soft gold fading to gray. Luna pressed her head against the fence, purring low. Willow stood behind Clara, silent, watching. Three beings, bound by something invisible and unexplainable, sharing the same breath, the same moment, knowing it would never come again. The wild doesn't take sides. It doesn't reward or punish. It simply restores what was meant to be, every creature finding its rhythm again. For humans, though, restoration feels like loss. Because our love, unlike theirs, carries memory. That night, after everyone left, Clara wrote one last entry in her journal. If love asks us to let go, I hope I can do it with gratitude, not fear. Because what they gave me was never mine to keep. It was only mine to witness. She closed the notebook, turned off the lantern, and listened to the night. The kind of stillness that feels both empty and full at once. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a bobcat called, low and distant, but free. The next chapter of their lives had already begun, though none of them knew it yet. Luna would soon take her first steps into the larger enclosure. Willow would learn the shape of quiet without her. And for Clara, the hardest part would not be the separation. It would be learning to live with the silence that follows love when it grows beyond her reach. If you've ever had to let go of something you loved, not because you wanted to, but because it was right, stay with this story. The next part of Luna and Willow's journey will remind us that even after parting, love doesn't vanish. It changes shape. And sometimes, it finds its way back. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, almost shyly, and yet they change everything. For Luna and Willow, that moment came with the rain. It wasn't supposed to be a reunion. It was supposed to be a goodbye. A week had passed since the decision was made to transition Luna, the bobcat, to the mountain enclosure. Each day, Clara watched her growing restlessness. The way her body pressed against the fence when she heard birds, or smelled the wind from the forest. The wild was calling her back, and Willow, the fawn, could sense it. She'd stand near the gate, long after Luna had been moved for the night, ears tilted toward the sound of soft footsteps fading away. When Luna was gone, the barn felt hollow, the kind of silence that hums inside your chest. Clara did her best to care for them both, but her heart carried a quiet ache. She'd tell herself this was right, that love sometimes has to step aside to let life take its course. Still, when she closed the barn door each evening, a question lingered. Would they remember each other once the distance began? Then came the storm, the kind that rises fast in the Blue Ridge Hills. Clouds swelling heavy and dark, wind bending the tall grass, the air thick with electricity. The refuge was prepared, securing gates and covering enclosures. Clara stayed late, uneasy. The rain began before she finished her rounds, falling in sheets that turned the dirt paths to rivers. She went to check the lower pens and found Willow trembling, soaked through, her small body pressed against the fence. The fawn's shelter door had jammed shut in the wind. Clara rushed to free her, but before she could, she heard it. A sound through the rain, low and sharp. A call she hadn't expected to hear again. Luna. The bobcat's voice carried through the storm like an echo of the past. Somehow she'd slipped from the side enclosure, following the scent of the familiar. When Clara reached them, The sight stopped her cold. Luna stood in the rain, fur plastered to her back, eyes fixed on Willow. For a moment, instinct held its breath, and then something miraculous. Luna moved forward, slow and deliberate, every step careful. She pressed her body against the fawn's side, curling slightly, sheltering her from the rain. Willow, still shaking, leaned in without fear. The predator became the protector. It wasn't a trick of instinct or hunger. It was something older, deeper. Recognition. Clara stood there in the downpour, the water running down her face, unable to look away. In that fragile space between thunder and stillness, she understood that love, even the kind that seems impossible, doesn't disappear when nature takes over. It simply finds a new way to speak. Later, when she replayed the security footage, she watched it over and over again. The way Luna's head lowered, how she pressed herself against the shivering fawn. There was no aggression, no hesitation, only comfort. It was the moment every caretaker dreams of, not because it defies logic, but because it reminds you that compassion is not taught, it's remembered. That night she wrote in her journal, "I thought I was preparing them for separation. Maybe all along I was preparing them to remember kindness, even when apart." The next day dawned clear and bright. Mist rose off the soaked fields, and the world smelled of earth and renewal. When Clara arrived at the barn, she found them exactly where she'd left them. Luna, stretched out in the straw beside Willow, both asleep, their breathing slow and synchronized. The sight felt sacred. Two creatures who should never have met, resting together, as if the storm itself had bound them closer. As sunlight crept across the floor, Willow stirred first, blinking in the light. Luna lifted her head, blinked back, and for a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, calm, unguarded, whole. Clara whispered, "You remember, we spend so much of our lives believing that fear is stronger than love, that nature or loss or distance will always have the final say. But sometimes, when the right hearts find each other, something softer rises in between, not to fight nature, but to balance it." Watching Luna and Willow, Clara realized that perhaps the purpose of love isn't to erase fear, but to live gently beside it. Because courage doesn't mean there's no instinct. It means choosing compassion, even when instinct trembles underneath. In the days that followed, researchers who worked with the refugees came to study what had happened. They spoke of cross-species social bonding, of early imprinting behaviors, of shared oxytocin responses during distress. Their language was clinical, but the meaning beneath it was beautiful. Love, measurable in hormones and heartbeats. But to Clara, it was simpler. What she saw wasn't data, it was grace, and it made her wonder how many other small miracles go unseen in the wild. Moments when compassion slips quietly into the ancient rhythm of survival, rewriting it for just long enough to remind us of what's possible. In nature, lightning divides the sky. Rivers carve the land. Predators hunt. Prey runs. That's the order of things. But once in a while, under rain and thunder, the world pauses. And for a single breath, two lives meet in peace. It's not rebellion, it's harmony, rediscovered. After the storm, the refuge staff gathered to watch the recorded moment. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of the younger caretakers, barely 20, eyes wide with wonder, whispered, "How is that even possible?" Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not supposed to be explained," she said. "Maybe it's just supposed to be witnessed." That storm marked the beginning of the end of their shared time, but also the beginning of something larger. It reminded Clara that healing isn't found in keeping things the same. It's found in allowing love to evolve, from holding to sheltering, to remembering.
She knew Luna would still leave. Willow would still stay. But now, the separation wouldn't be the story's end. It would be the echo of something eternal. Proof that trust, once born, can survive distance, time, and even instinct. As summer deepened, Luna's transfer became inevitable. The staff began preparing the transport cage, the paperwork, and the schedule. But something had changed in everyone's hearts. What once felt like loss now felt like completion. Because sometimes, the wild gives us back what we thought we'd lost. Not in the same form, but in meaning. And soon, it would give Clara one more gift. A reunion she never expected, long after she thought the story was over. If this moment between Luna and Willow reminded you that kindness can return even after distance and fear, stay with this story. The next chapter will show how love, once awakened, never truly leaves the wild, or the heart that carried it. Every story that begins in closeness eventually meets the moment of parting. Not because love has ended, but because life asks it to grow differently. The hardest goodbyes aren't shouted or dramatic. They happen quietly, in the spaces between heartbeats, when the world keeps moving, and you have to let it. After the storm, the refuge settled into a rhythm of calm. The air smelled clean again, and the hills glowed green after days of rain. But beneath that peace lay the weight of what everyone knew. It was time. Luna, the bobcat, had reached full maturity. Her instincts were strong now, her body built for the wild. Willow, the fawn, had begun to wander further on her own, curious but cautious, testing her independence. They still shared glances through the wooden fence. Small gestures of recognition that felt sacred, not of ownership, but of understanding. The bond was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the simple comfort of childhood. It had become something quieter, something eternal. Clara Bennett, their caretaker, felt that truth more deeply than anyone. She had known this day would come, yet knowing didn't make it easier. Luna's relocation to the mountain sanctuary had been scheduled for weeks. It was a vast, protected range, where rescued wildcats lived semi-free, a place designed to mirror the rhythms of nature without human interference. The team prepared early. Crates were lined with soft bedding, tags checked, and documents signed. The kind of careful logistics that protect life, but can't protect the heart. As Clara walked down the familiar dirt path toward Luna's enclosure, her step slowed. She could hear the steady hum of cicadas, the gentle crunch of gravel beneath her boots. Every sound felt amplified, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When she reached the gate, Luna was already waiting, poised, alert, her golden eyes catching the morning light. For a long moment, neither moved. They just watched each other, the way people do when words are no longer needed. The handlers waited respectfully behind Clara as she knelt near the fence. Luna came closer, pressing her head gently against the mesh. "Hey, sweetheart," Clara whispered. "You ready?" A soft purr answered, low, steady, the same sound that had filled the barn on cold nights months before. Clara slipped her fingers through the wire, brushing against the familiar warmth of fur. Willow stood a few yards away, watching quietly. Her ears twitched, her body still. She took a small step forward, then stopped. There was no panic, no bleating, just an awareness that something was changing. The handlers opened the transport gate. Luna stepped inside willingly, one paw at a time, her movements confident, calm. Clara followed her to the edge. Heart heavy but grateful, she whispered, "Go live, my girl. Be what you were born to be." The door closed with a soft click. As the truck pulled away, Willow lifted her head high, eyes following until the vehicle disappeared behind the trees.
Clara rested a hand on her back. Neither of them moved for a long time. That evening, the refuge was quiet. The air held the scent of pine and distant rain. Clara sat on the steps of the barn, notebook open on her lap. She began to write, though her vision blurred halfway down the page. "It's strange," she wrote, "to love something wild and never truly own it. To be the bridge between captivity and freedom. Maybe that's what care really is. Holding without keeping." She paused, looking out across the field where the two once played. Willow was grazing near the oak tree, the same one that had shaded them as cubs. Every so often she'd lift her head, looking toward the fence as if expecting to see Luna there. Clara smiled sadly. "She'll come back in her own way," she murmured. "They always do." Separation has its own kind of grace. It's the moment when love lets go of its need to hold and instead begins to trust in memory. In the weeks that followed, Clara kept her routine. Feedings, check-ins, notes. But there was an emptiness in the rhythm now, like a missing instrument in a familiar song. And yet, that emptiness wasn't cold. It was tender. The space love leaves behind when it's done its work. She'd find small reminders. A paw print dried in the mud near the fence line. A tuft of fur caught on a splintered post. Proof that love had once passed here, alive and wild. Sometimes, Willow would wander to that same spot and stand there, her ears turning toward the woods as if listening. And maybe she was. Because sometimes, love echoes in ways we can't hear, but the heart still does. Clara often thought of her own daughter then, how grief had once felt like separation too, final, unbearable. But time, like nature, had softened its edges. Now, as she watched Willow stand where Luna once stood, she saw something new. The pattern of continuation, the proof that love, once planted, never really disappears. It transforms, just as the forest does. From season to season, loss to renewal. She whispered to herself, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not forgetting, but remembering without pain. In the wild, bonds rarely last forever. Herds scatter, prides divide, rivers change course. But still, every creature leaves traces of connection. Scents on the wind, trails in the grass, echoes in the soil. And maybe humans are not so different, because the heart, like the forest, remembers the paths love once walked. Weeks later, Clara received a photo from the mountain enclosure. It showed Luna, healthy and alert, perched on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley. The note from the wildlife team read simply, "She's thriving." Clara printed it and pinned it above her desk. Every morning she'd glance at it before starting her rounds. A reminder that letting go can also be a kind of keeping. And sometimes on quiet evenings, she'd swear she heard it. A distant rustle beyond the tree line. A faint, familiar call carried by the wind. Willow would lift her head too, eyes fixed on the horizon. And though there was only silence, something in that stillness felt like recognition. Love doesn't vanish when life changes shape. It lingers, not in possession, but in presence. In knowing that what we once tended now walks freely somewhere in the world. For Clara, Luna, and Willow, separation wasn't the end of their bond. It was its next form, quieter, wider, as boundless as the landscape itself. As autumn began to settle over Willow Creek, the fields turned amber, and the air carried a cooler hush. Life moved forward, as it always does. But one afternoon, nearly a year after Luna's departure, a chance encounter would bring everything full circle. A reunion that no one expected, yet somehow every heart had been waiting for. If you've ever had to let go of something, a person, a moment, or a piece of yourself, stay with this story. The next part will show how love, even when divided by distance, finds its way home again. Some endings don't arrive with thunder or applause. They come quietly, like the hush that follows a long, healing sigh. It had been almost a year since Luna's release, and yet every corner of Willow Creek still carried her memory. By the time autumn returned, the refuge had changed again. The air grew cooler, the hillsides painted in amber and rust. The rhythm of care continued. Feedings, repairs, rescues. The world never truly stops, not even for the things we miss. And yet, in that constancy, something beautiful lingers, not in what we lose, but in what we keep. Clara knew this now. One crisp afternoon, she walked the familiar path down to the lower pasture where Willow grazed. The fawn was nearly grown now, stronger, surer. The spots on her coat had faded, replaced by the soft hue of adulthood. She still had the same gentle eyes, though, the kind that carry the weight of everything they've seen, and somehow stay kind. As Clara leaned against the fence, a movement in the distance caught her eye, a shadow along the tree line. It was silent, low, deliberate. She lifted her binoculars and felt her heart stutter. A bobcat. It stood on the ridge, poised, confident. The light caught the familiar gold in its fur, the same tufted ears that once flicked at every sound in the barn. Luna. Clara froze, afraid to blink, afraid it might all vanish. Luna didn't come close. She didn't need to. She simply sat there for a moment watching. The air felt suspended between them, thick with memory. Then, as quietly as she'd appeared, Luna turned and disappeared into the trees, a whisper returning to the wild. Clara exhaled, her breath trembling. "You came home," she whispered. Willow lifted her head as if sensing it too, staring toward the same ridge. It wasn't a reunion to touch or to hold, but it was enough. Sometimes, love's greatest gift is knowing it still exists somewhere, even if it no longer belongs to us. That night, Clara returned to the barn and tacked a small photo above her desk. Luna on the ridge, caught by the refuge's field camera. Beneath it, she placed a note in careful handwriting. "Some hearts never leave home. They just walk a little farther than we can see." She began sharing Luna and Willow's story with visitors, volunteers, and school groups that came through the refuge, not as a story about survival, but as one about connection. About how even natural enemies can learn kindness when given safety, warmth, and time. And how the people who care for them, the quiet hands behind the fences, can heal a little too. When she spoke, her voice carried the softness of someone who had learned what love means when stripped of control. She told them how the wild teaches not just through beauty, but through honesty. How caring is not about taming, it's about trusting. And how every rescue, every small act of compassion, ripples outward into the larger story of life itself. The visitors often left with tears in their eyes, not from sadness, but from the reminder that the world, even in its wildness, still holds room for gentleness. Later that winter, Clara sat by the window of the caretaker's cabin. Snow fell lightly outside, blanketing the refuge in quiet white. The world looked at peace, asleep, but alive. She thought about all the lives that had passed through her hands, fragile, fierce, fleeting. Some had stayed. Others, like Luna, had returned to the wild where they belonged. And she realized something she'd never put into words before. We don't keep love by holding it. We keep it by remembering it with gratitude. Because every living thing we nurture, whether it's a person, an animal, or a dream, leaves something behind in us, a mark that doesn't fade. Luna had taught her that gentleness isn't weakness, it's courage. The kind that stands quietly in the rain, the kind that shelters another instead of striking. Willow had taught her that healing takes time, and that strength doesn't mean forgetting pain. It means living with it, softly, until it no longer hurts to remember.
And Clara, in her quiet way,
Had learned that sometimes the best kind of love isn't the one that lasts forever, but the one that teaches us how to keep walking once it's gone.
A few months later, spring returned. The air warmer, the hills alive with color. A new rescue arrived at the refuge. A tiny lynx kitten, orphaned and trembling, found at the edge of a road. Clara lifted it gently into her arms, and in that instant, the circle began again. The care, the risk, the hope. The story never really ends. It only changes its name. When she placed the kitten under the heat lamp, she thought of Luna, the small heartbeat that had once fit in her palm, and smiled. Hello. There was a peace in knowing the work would continue. That kindness, once set in motion, never stops moving forward. It flows from one act to the next, from one life to another, like water carving through stone, patient and enduring. And somewhere, in the quiet wild beyond the hills, a grown bobcat lived free, carrying, in some unspoken way, the memory of a friendship that once defied nature itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara stepped outside one last time. She looked across the fields, the refuge bathed in soft gold. In the distance, a single deer moved through the tall grass. Willow. For a moment, Clara thought she saw another shadow nearby, low, sleek, moving with purpose. But when she blinked, it was gone. She smiled. It's enough just knowing you're both out there. Maybe that's what this story was really about. Not defying nature, but remembering that we're part of it. That love, kindness, and loyalty aren't just human traits. They're threads woven through the very heart of the world. And maybe, in moments of quiet, when we stop rushing, when we simply watch the light move across the trees, we can still feel that connection, humming beneath everything. It's there in the soft call of the wild, in the eyes of the animals we rescue, in the hands that care, in the lives we touch and let go. It's what remains when everything else changes. If this story of Luna and Willow touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on what love means to you. Not the kind we keep, but the kind we share. If you believe the world could use a little more compassion, a little more hope, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and help these stories reach more hearts. And if you'd like to go one step further, you can leave a super thanks or make a small donation below. Every contribution helps us rescue and heal wild animals, bobcats, fawns, and others, giving them a second chance to live free and loved. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, creates ripples that travel farther than we'll ever see. From all of us at Willow Creek, thank you for helping the wild remember that love still lives here.